Hi, this is Lori, and I'm going to spend a few moments to discuss bureaucracy. That is the topic this week. And one good way to look at this topic is to look at something that is currently in the news, something that has been controversial within our country, and something that really does have a good way of looking at or allowing us a good way to look at the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and administrative agencies, which brings us to this topic of bureaucracy. How does it all work together or don't work? And some people call this really red tape. And this may help some of you understand why the complexity of repealing Obamacare may or may not be as simple as some would think, or it may be easier than some would think. So I start off with this humorous slide that has a picture of President Obama, and he said, or in the picture it says, "Fine, I give up. I'll defund Obamacare and go with the Affordable Care Act instead." And the reason that is slightly humorous is because many people don't know that Obamacare is not the official name of the law that's in controversy. It is the Affordable Care Act, or also the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So let's look at how each branch and administrative agencies has a role in what happens with Obamacare. In 2010, after much controversy in Congress, and I think it was a vote of 219 to 212, it was a really close vote, but Obama really was an advocate of this act, and he signed the act into law in 2010. The key features surrounding the Affordable Care Act can be found at the healthandhumanservices.gov website. It is the department that is responsible for handling healthcare projects. And some of the key, when you visit their website, you'll find some of the key features and discussions about or information about the Affordable Care Act. And what you see in this slide is what you would also see on one of their web pages. There are laws in there that give benefits to women, particularly as it relates to preventative services, screenings, and birth control that is not always available under insurance plans without the government getting involved. So while some may believe that insurances treat men and women the same with respect to the benefits or what is covered, that is not necessarily true. And so that's why this becomes something of controversy even amongst women. Young adult coverage. Young adults up to the age of 26 can be covered on their parents' insurance. One of the benefits of the Affordable Care Act is just that under some insurance plans without the Affordable Care Act, parents cannot continue to cover their young adult children. This becomes an issue because many students now are leaving college without a job or are underemployed with jobs that don't provide for health insurance. So we have or may have numerous people that don't have access to purchasing health insurance. Now this can be done through their parents' employment. The program, the act does help strengthen Medicare, and it does have clauses in there about holding insurance companies accountable. It does allow for people with pre-existing conditions to obtain insurance. That's another huge feature. So if someone has already been diagnosed as a diabetic or has cancer or PTSD, that person can obtain insurance. Insurance companies cannot hold pre-existing conditions against that person and not offer insurance. That's another huge benefit for people with pre-existing conditions. Those are some of the key features, along with others that you'll find at the HHS website. HHS.gov, as I mentioned, is the administrative agency that's responsible for administering health care programs. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, which is ACE, is responsible for administering the Affordable Care Act. So if you were to visit either of those websites, you will find much more information about the pros and cons, or how to get involved and obtain coverage, or why you should or should not be an advocate of the Affordable Care Act. Which leads us to, this has been met with much controversy. That is what now President Trump ran on during his campaign. In part, he made a promise that he was going to make sure that Obamacare was repealed. And many of you are aware that during the process of voting for Obamacare, many of the Republicans were definitely against this plan. So the current goal of our legislative branch in Congress and our president will be to repeal Obamacare. But before we get to that, let's look at how citizens and the courts played a role in what happened after 2010 when Obama signed the law. Usually when any law, especially one that is controversial, becomes the law, it will be met with major opposition and lawsuits. And one of the first ones to reach the U.S. Supreme Court and became really the landmark case involving this is the Hobby Lobby case. Now, you may be familiar with Hobby Lobby as the crafts and picture, and I'm not quite sure how they're categorized, but I know they sell crafts and flowers and art and all those sorts of things. Hobby Lobby is a family-run business, but they are a closely held corporation. And they have their position was, due to their religious beliefs, their faith, that it would go against their religion to offer insurance plans that would then provide benefits for people to, let's say, have birth control, get abortions, anything that the coverage would allow services that goes against their faith. And they were saying, they being the owners of Hobby Lobby, were saying that they have a right to their religious freedom and that the government should not be able to impose on them the obligation to require services for people that will engage in conduct that is adverse to their faith. And that is the spirit of their argument. And the U.S. Supreme Court actually held very narrowly that they were right, they being Hobby Lobby, that Hobby Lobby, as a closely held corporation, had a right to religious freedom. So this was a major victory, but it wasn't a major victory for corporate America. It was a major victory for closely held corporations. So this is a narrow part of our society as their right to religious freedom. So now Hobby Lobby doesn't have to offer those insurances that would then offer benefits that would allow people to engage in conduct that is adverse to their faith. So that is a win for religious freedom. However, there is another case where the United States Supreme Court found itself upholding the Affordable Care Act. It was a direct challenge to Congress's power under the Commerce Clause, under Article 1, Section 8, to even pass this kind of law. So this was a direct challenge to Congress's power. And the United States Supreme Court, in an upset decision, and what I mean by that, the people who were against Affordable Care Act really thought, especially under the leadership of John Roberts, that the court would find the law itself unconstitutional. And that would have been a major victory. But interesting enough, with John Roberts leading the court, they found the law to be constitutional. And so the current law of the land is that the Affordable Care Act is still in place. And I say the current law with just a little support because last year, November 8, 2016, Donald Trump did win, and he had promised, that was one of his major campaign promises, to repeal Obamacare. And one of his first executive orders after the inauguration on January 20th of 2017 is that he signed an order that could gut the Affordable Health Care's individual mandate. He didn't sign an order repealing because he does not have the lawful right to repeal Obamacare. That would be for Congress. But he certainly, he being President Trump, can limit the power or grant power to administrative agencies on how they enforce the Affordable Care Act. Think about this. So the executive branch is our enforcement branch of the law. The legislative branch enforces the law, and the judiciary branch tells us what the law means. So the judiciary found that the law is constitutional, and the executive branch has already begun to say, we're not going to enforce it the way that you want it enforced. So what does this mean, what President Trump did on his first day? One of the things is that the nature of the order was that this doesn't grant any new powers to federal agency, but it sends a clear signal that they should use whatever authority they have to scale back regulations and penalties. Another way to look at this is that administrative agencies won't face any penalties for failure to enforce the ACA. So it's a way of saying to administrative agencies, you really don't have to enforce it. You don't have to impose any or enact any new regulations. In fact, you could enact regulations that would be consistent with not enforcing it. That's a direct directive to Health and Human Services and the administration that administers the Affordable Care Act. They can almost stop the administration of it and certainly stop fining or mandating that companies and individuals follow it. So while the law may still be effective, the executive branch is saying we're not really going to support it. So this is one of the first things we see out the current administration by way of policy and enforcement. And that's what you get from the executive branch. In many ways, they decide what laws they're going to enforce and how they're going to enforce them. However, as you may have known by the time you listen to this video, President Trump's second day in office has been met with major protests. It has been deemed now the largest day after inauguration protest in our history, where women organized the march. It was not, the way I understand it, as much as an anti-Trump march as it was a march to say that women were going to mobilize, become active, and have strong opposition to stop anything that the current administration is going to do to impose on laws and policies that impact women's lives and their families. So now you see citizens that are organizing and preparing to try to stop any laws or policies that are adverse to their interests. So this will be interesting to watch as this unfolds in the upcoming years. And so the question should be, what now? We have an executive order. We have Congress working on trying to repeal it. We have a Republican Congress. We have a Republican White House. The question will be, what will happen now with the Affordable Care Act? Because on top of that, you do have, I think the numbers are close to 30 million people who are now insured under the Affordable Care Act that were not insured. You do have the issue of, is this going to be repealing and replacing, or just repealing without replacement, or eventually just changing some portions of the Affordable Care Act? Choice means, is it going to be choice given to the states and individuals about health care? Will it be that the federal government still has some mandates about health care? Some will say at the end of the day there needs to be something that makes sure that all Americans have affordable, equal access to health care. And certainly some opponents are saying the government should not tell us what to do, which is kind of interesting about health care. And I say that's interesting because there's lots of controversy about what the government should be able to say to women about health care. So these issues are very controversial. And I want you to think about what should happen now, what you think will happen now, and really what's at issue and what role now will the administrative agencies play in enforcing or not enforcing all or some of the Affordable Care Act. But that gives you an overview of how the branches of government along with administrative agencies work together to support or not support the law.